In this video, we are going to describe the different methods of recording Greyfleet mileage to GHGi Analytics. Greyfleet is a term used to describe business mileage undertaken in a private vehicle, car, van or motorcycle. Most greenhouse gas reporting protocols require this information to be recorded and reported. The UK government's Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting (SECR) legislation requires it to be declared in the transport section. Greyfleet mileage can be the most difficult data to get hold of, as it is usually recorded as out-of-pocket expenses. Extracting this from an expenses system can be difficult, particularly if the expenses system is paper or spreadsheet based. We have provided 5 different options for collecting the data, each becoming progressively more accurate. The situation I am going to describe is one where an individual in, for example, the accounts department, enters the mileage data for the entire organisation on a monthly basis. Monthly updates allow for better analysis of trends. Method 1. This is where the only information available from the expenses system is the sum paid in mileage expenses in a specific period. This would normally be monthly, but quarterly or annual periods are possible. For analysis, it is best to enter data monthly. You enter the amount paid in mileage expenses to your employees in a given period. The system holds the company mileage rate, usually 45 pence a mile for private mileage and 12 pence a mile for those using company cars. This allows the system to calculate the number of miles paid out. As we don't know the size of the car or the fuel type, the system uses the government factor for average car and unknown fuel type to calculate the emissions. Logging in takes you to the dashboard page, where we select Data Entry in the navigation bar, and in the drop-down select Travel. This in turn takes us to the Travel Distance Transaction page. All the fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter Greyfleet mileage March 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st March 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st March 2021. The next field is ownership. It is important to understand the issue here and how it relates to company-owned or leased cars. The treatment of emissions from business travel and how it is reported depends on the ownership of the vehicle involved and who pays for the fuel. Many companies provide vehicles that they own or lease to certain employees, but it is how the fuel is paid for that is important. If the vehicle is fully expensed, that is, all fuel is paid for by the company, be it private or business mileage, this is dealt with in the other fuel section. However, if the driver of the company car pays for the fuel out of their own pocket and then claims back only mileage undertaken on company business, then it is dealt with here. To be technical, business travel conducted in privately owned cars is reported in Scope 3, whilst business travel conducted in company-owned or leased cars is reported in Scope 1. Now, this is important, as the breakdown is necessary for both management and statutory reporting, which may mean that 2 separate entries for the same month may be needed, one for company-owned vehicles and one for privately owned vehicles. If you are in this situation, you should be able to get the company car mileage claims from the P11Ds. However, for some companies, it may not be possible to extract the information separately from the expenses system. In this case, we recommend a compromise. Take the time to estimate the split between the mileage claimed by drivers of company-owned vehicles and the drivers of privately owned vehicles, perhaps over a period of 2 or 3 months, and then use this for the rest of the year. You would be advised to repeat the process once a year, but for many companies it will not be an issue. We are going to select privately owned or leased. In total gross remuneration, GBP, we enter the amount claimed for business mileage in that period defined above. We'll say £1,500, so I'll enter 1,500. We'd ignore the next two fields. You now have the ability to upload some sort of documentation to support the auditing process. Then press Submit, which takes you to the Travel Transaction page. This details all the Greyfleet transaction entries. It includes emissions from the method used and the fuel in question, in addition to well-to-tank WTT emissions. This page is accessed from the Report section on the navigation bar and by selecting Transactions. You will then be offered a choice of which fuel type you require, and if you want to specify a time period. I am not going to select a time period, so I will just click on Travel. Method 2. We use this information when the total miles claimed can be obtained from the expenses system, but not the vehicle size or fuel type. As we do not know the size of car or the fuel type, the system uses the government factor for average car and unknown fuel type to calculate the emissions. All fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter Greyfleet mileage, February 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st February 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 28th of February 2021. The next field is ownership. As stated previously, most companies will only need to select privately owned or leased vehicles, and this is what we shall do. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1,850 miles were claimed, so we type in 1850. In the units drop-down, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick with the default miles. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for any future auditing process. Press Submit, which takes you to the Travel Transaction page described before. Method 3. We use this information when the total miles claimed and the fuel type can be obtained from the expenses system, but not the size of the different vehicles. We do not know the size of the car, so the system uses average car from the government factors and then selects the appropriate fuel type to calculate the emissions. The fuel types available are diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, hybrid electric diesel, hybrid electric petrol, plug-in hybrid electric diesel, plug-in hybrid electric petrol, battery electric vehicle. You make an entry for each fuel type in turn. In case of petrol, the system calculates the emissions based on the mileage provided and the average car using petrol. You then make another entry for the next fuel type, which might be diesel. The system calculates the emissions for that fuel based on the mileage and average car. All fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter Petrol, Greyfleet, April 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st April 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 30th April 2021. The ownership field is next. Again, if you have both drivers of privately owned cars and drivers of company-owned cars claiming mileage, try and obtain the split from your expenses system. If not, estimate the split as suggested previously. We will select privately owned or leased. Fuel type is next. We will select petrol. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1,460 miles were claimed for privately owned or leased. So we type in 1460. In the units drop-down, we will leave it at miles. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation. Press Submit. Again, this takes you to the travel transaction page. There are likely to be mileage claims for different fuel types, so adding a different fuel type for the same period will be common, which is what we will do. In the description field, in this case, I will enter Hybrid Petrol Greyfleet April 2021. Next is the from date. We will again enter 1st April 2021, followed by the to date, 30th April 2021. In the ownership field, I will select privately owned or leased. Fuel type is next. We will select hybrid electric petrol. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 90 miles were claimed. Not that many people have hybrid electric cars, so we type in 90. In the units drop-down, we will leave it at miles. As before, we ignore the next two fields. Again, we recommend that you upload some sort of supporting documentation to assist the auditing process. Press Submit. This again takes you to the travel transaction page. You could have claims for more than two fuel types, so you repeat the process as often as required. Method 4. We have more information in this case, and this is the first option where we can separate out vehicles other than cars. The expenses system can tell us the total miles claimed by vehicle type, size of that vehicle type, and by fuel type for that size and type of vehicle. Vehicle types available are car, motorcycle, and van. For car, you have small car, medium car, large car, and average. For motorcycle, you have small, medium, large, and average. For van, you have Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, and average. The fuel types available for cars are the same as before: diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, hybrid electric diesel, hybrid electric petrol, plug-in hybrid electric diesel, plug-in hybrid electric petrol, and battery electric vehicle. Fuel type available for motorcycle is petrol. The UK government factors make no distinction between 4-stroke and the less used 2-stroke fuels. The fuel types available for vans are diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, battery electric vehicle, and unknown fuel type. You make an entry for each vehicle type, size, and fuel type in turn. In the first case, it might be the mileage claim for all medium-sized petrol cars in a specific time period. The system calculates the emissions based on the total mileage entered and medium-sized cars using petrol. You then make another entry, which might be for all Class 2 diesel vans. The system calculates the emissions based on the total mileage entered and Class 2 vans using diesel. Remember, we are recording distance for privately owned vehicles used for business travel and company-owned vehicles where the drivers claim business mileage, not fully expensed vehicles. As before, all fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. In this case, I will enter petrol, medium car Greyfleet, January 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st January 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st January 2021. Again, in the ownership field, I will select privately owned or leased. The vehicle type is next. We will click on the drop-down where from the 3 vehicle types on offer, we will select car. In the car size drop-down, we will select medium car. In the fuel drop-down, we will select petrol. We now enter the distance. Let's say the expenses system showed 1,120 miles were claimed, so we type in 1120. In the units drop-down below, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we will stick with the default miles. As before, we ignore the next 2 fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the audit process. Press Submit. This again takes us to the travel transaction page. Now, some of your staff may have their own vans or more likely pickups that are used occasionally for business travel. A Ford Ranger pickup or a VW Amarok pickup would fit into Class 3 van. In this case, I will enter Diesel Class 3 Vans Greyfleet, January 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st January 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st January 2021. Once again, in the ownership field, I will select privately owned or leased. The vehicle type is next. We click on the drop-down, where from the 3 vehicle types offered, we will select van. You will now see that by selecting van, the names next to the 2 drop-downs change. Car size changes to van size and fuel type changes to van fuel type. The contents also change. Under van size, you now have Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, Class 4 and average. We will select Class 3 for a pickup. In van fuel, the options have also changed. It shows diesel, petrol, LPG, CNG, battery electric vehicle and unknown fuel type. We will select diesel. Next is the distance. Let's say 900 miles were claimed, so we type in 900. In the units drop-down, we can either select miles or kilometres, but we stick with the default miles. As before, we ignore the next 2 fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the audit process. Press Submit. This again takes you to the travel transaction page. You must not think that to use this, you must have data for all the options. One example would be where you have information for car mileage split by fuel type and van mileage split by fuel type, but no details of the vehicle size. You would complete the first 4 fields as usual. Then, in the case of petrol cars, you would select car under vehicle type, in car size average and in fuel type petrol. In the case of a van, you would select van under vehicle type, in van size average and in fuel type diesel. Method 5. This is the most accurate method of Greyfleet emissions reporting. It involves loading GHGi Analytics with details of privately owned vehicles and their owners, and similarly, company-owned or leased vehicles and their drivers. Where possible, the grams per kilometre figure for the vehicle concerned should also be included. This is found on the Vehicle Registration Document V5C. The process, setting up vehicles, is described in a separate video. Mileage claimed for each specific individual is added to the system against their particular vehicle. As before, all fields marked in red are required fields. The first field is the description field. As this record is for an individual, not the mileage claimants as a whole, I will enter Jack Wills, Greyfleet mileage, March 2021. Next is the from date. We will enter 1st March 2021. This is followed by the to date, which will be 31st March 2021. We now select the car. Jack's car is GW20PIH. We now claim the distance. Let's say the expenses showed 183 miles were claimed, so we type in 183. In the units drop-down, we will stick with the default unit miles. We ignore the next two fields. Again, you have the ability to upload some sort of supporting documentation for use in the auditing process. Press Submit, which takes you to the Travel Transaction page. To reiterate, we offer 5 different options depending on the information available from your expenses system. It is possible that you may need to use more than one of the options provided. Option 2 for one part of the organisation and Option 3 for a different part. The system is designed with this situation in mind. With the exception of Option 5, the distance entered is company-wide for a specific time period and is not entered individual by individual. As stated, Options 1, 2 and 3 are designed to cope with the limitations of some expenses systems. This includes the fact that the vehicle type is unknown. If you use these 3 options, just treat all your vehicles as cars when inputting the data. Finally, we are recording distance for both privately owned vehicles used for business travel and company-owned vehicles where the driver claims business mileage, not fully expensed vehicles where the company pays for all the petrol. I hope this has been helpful and thank you for watching this video.